Everyone's favorite movie about a giant gorilla is probably one of the King Kongs, whether it be Peter Jackson's awesome adventure movie from 2005, the newly released Godzilla vs. Kong, or even the 1933 original. There's something about the massive ape that has been loved by movie fans for nearly 100 years. But he's not the only one that has a few big movies under his belt, with a close runner-up being the subject of today's video. Mighty Joe Young is a 1998 adventure film directed by Ron Underwood. It stars Charlize Theron and Bill Paxton as animal conservationists trying to stop poachers from killing a giant gorilla. Joe, who in this movie is actually responsible for biting off a few of the lead poacher's fingers at the beginning of the film. The movie features a giant 2,000-pound gorilla as some sort of genetic anomaly that Charlize Theron's character Jill is told to care for as instructed from her mother's dying wish. Bill Paxton gets wrapped up in everything while doing normal conservation research and stumbling across the massive gorilla on accident. Now, for those of you who may be unaware, this film is a remake of a 1949 movie of the same name, and back then, much like today, it's kind of hard to talk about Mighty Joe Young without bringing up King Kong, which was obviously inspirational to it. I'm sure most of you out there have seen at least one King Kong movie, and even if you by some chance haven't, you know that he picks up a woman and climbs a building just from being a normal human being existing in the modern world today. Mighty Joe Young, though, that character never really got as much recognition, and unfortunately, when it comes to this 1998 remake, while the marketing campaign was pretty memorable at the time, almost nobody saw it. In fact, one of the things that I think the film is most well known for is how much of a box office dud it was back when it came out. But there's some stories that go along with that as well.
Can you get him to put me down?
Joe, drop him.
Before we go into any of that, I want to talk about the movie itself. Mighty Joe Young is not what I'd call one of the greatest films ever made, but it is one of the most entertaining adventure movies Disney made in the late 90s. And being a kid during that time period, it really does remind me of how vastly different the landscape of Hollywood was back then. The best way I can describe this movie to you is if you take something like what Bill Paxton brought to Twister and just mix that in with a lot of the big animal movies from back then with a tone that it's just purely old school Disney, you might get an idea of what you're in for here. The action sequences, the fun banter between characters, and the awesome locations they shot in really do make for a solid time. Also, the music that's done by James Horner, it's really good. It kind of sounds like what the composer made for Avatar a little over 10 years later in 2009, which goes really well with the whole jungle exploration and fun atmosphere. It's really hard to not love both Charlize Theron and Bill Paxton in this because they play such relatable and interesting people. So honestly, guys, while again, this isn't one of the greatest movies ever made, I do think it's pretty good in its own right and something to have fun with, which is really weird considering what kind of movie it is. You see, this thing is going out of its way to be as modern as it possibly can be, with the director having made one of the best monster movies of the 90s, Tremors. I got a whole video on that. He got the job to take on the remake, and the film structuring itself around the jungle adventure hype that was going on at the time. Truth be told, guys, I get Tarzan, George of the Jungle, and Mighty Joe Young mixed up a lot when it comes to growing up in the late 90s, and I think that's because all of these movies were trying to emulate the whole adventurous attitude that Jurassic Park started just a few years earlier. In fact, one of the things that may have helped hinder Mighty Joe Young's performance at the movies just a bit could have been the sequel to Jurassic Park, which Spielberg admits he changed in order to compete with this movie. You see, at the time, Steven heard of remakes of both Godzilla and Mighty Joe Young coming out soon when he was busy filming the second movie in his dinosaur series, The Lost World. So he opted to beat both of those films to the punch by taking the idea they originally had in mind for Jurassic Park 3, Dinosaurs Running Wild in the City, and made the end of JP2 that movie instead. By the time Mighty Joe Young came out in late 1998, we had already seen the T-Rex rampage through San Diego and the giant American remake of Godzilla come out. So this giant gorilla movie was kinda dead on arrival, sadly. With a budget of $90 million, Mighty Joe Young only made $50 million back, which is a very bad performance at the movies. But truth be told, I don't really think that means it's terrible at all. Nobody saw it, but damn, they should have, man. There's so many scenes in this thing that look like they were lifted directly out of the game trail sequence from JP2, or even the Rex rampaging through the city from that film, only this time put in a blender and given the Disney spin. And while, if I'm being honest, I do think Lost World Jurassic Park to be the better movie, Mighty Joe Young is definitely better than something like Jurassic Park 3, so yeah, I think a lot of people will have a ton of fun with this one. It's just a shame that when it came out, most of you probably didn't pay a ticket to see it. You know, honestly, I didn't pay a ticket to see it either. I was a little kid. Special effects wise, the movie looks the best when it's doing something inventive with the gorilla suit that they used to create the monster, alongside with the pretty good CGI they were working with at the time. I think there's a lot of it that hasn't really aged well, but for the time, again, this was about as modern as you could get. And I think it paid off decently for what kind of movie this happens to be. Rick Baker worked on it, by the way. The film was nominated for an Academy Award for those special effects at the time. And, you know, also, one of the coolest things about it happens to be some small cameos featuring both Terry Moore and Ray Harryhausen, the original actress, star, and stop motion effects creator of Mighty Joe Young from 1949. It's kind of sweet. Anyways, guys, those are all just my own thoughts on the movie. What do you think? Have you seen it? And do you plan on seeing it soon? Personally, I think the movie is a really fun snapshot of adventure and animal films from the late 90s. I can remember buying old Disney films back then and just seeing the coming soon to Disney video and DVD, and you'd have that little clip of the guy going, "Oh my God.
Oh my God."
As Mighty Joe Young was tearing through the city. This was a movie they tried to push really hard, but barely anyone saw it. So whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be on Mighty Joe Young, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below.